This has been a very active week for the bankruptcy. I feel that we've had kind of these, these ebbs and flows, but it's coming to a head now, Nolan.
Well, it's been startling last few days if you look at how things have shifted. The retirees, as you said, have gone from taking what would have been really steep cuts to almost no cuts. You've got, except in their health care, the creditors even, you went from 15 to 20 cents on the dollar, now up to 74 cents on the dollar. Makes you wonder where all of this money is coming from. And it appears to be a whole lot of accounting gimmicks in part and, money from the state and federal government.
Okay, so where is all the money coming from, and what do you mean? What does Nolan mean when he's saying accounting gimmicks? Explain this to people.
Well, I mean, if you can get money from one pot and put it in another, you can claim that that second pot is whole, or more whole than it was, and you don't have to necessarily look at that other pot that you've taken it out of. And there's some of that going on here with some of the things that they're discussing. I mean, this idea that you might take money that is intended for blight, federal money that's intended for blight all over the state, and send more of it to Detroit to displace the money that we were going to use on blight so that we could put it into pensions. You're still shorting somebody somewhere.
They're also adjusting the rate of return projections. A simple little adjustment, moving from 6.25% a year projections on the rate of return to 6.75, and voila, a whole big pile of debt is wiped out.
Right.
And
well,
it makes you wonder from what is the real debt number? I mean, what do we really owe?
Well, that's the so I mean, public pensions in general tend to do very well on their returns. It's between 7 and 8%. So we're still below that, even with this
and that's
adjustment.
Probably prudent.
And that's right. I mean, at 6.75, you're going to eliminate 90% of the risk that the pension boards were taking before at 8%, which is where they were, and that's how they got themselves into such trouble.
And yet we've been going through this kabuki dance now for 9 months where they're asking, telling pensioners, we're going to take all of this money from you and this. But they did get some significant sacrifices from the pensioners in terms of health care being drastically reduced. In terms of the general retirement system, they don't get their annual step increases any longer. So, I mean, they didn't walk out whole, but they certainly didn't walk out the way that...
Well, it was much better than anyone had ever projected, even when we were starting to talk about this process. How important is it, Stephen, that you've got the general retirement system, that they have endorsed this, and now police and fire are going to be voting on this tomorrow? What does this mean for the entire process? Because this was really the main, not the main sticking point, but I think the biggest focus that everyone had in the bankruptcy process.
I think it was the last real hurdle that existed. I mean, the pensioners are the most vulnerable and sympathetic class among the creditors. I mean, these are people who are making very little money, and any adjustment to that would hurt them in a way that a couple $1 million for a bank is different. That doesn't mean that the bank should just get nothing, but I mean I think you really do want to take very good care of the most vulnerable people. So what was going to happen to them, I think, was the major sticking point in this whole deal. I would never have supported a deal that would have crushed pensioners. I mean, I just think that's unconscionable, and there is a moral issue with that. I think Judge Rhodes, frankly, probably has that same concern. And so moving from 24 cents or 34 cents cut to 4 cents and no cut, that is huge. I mean, that really dislodges the principal moral question in this whole issue.
But the other question is, what happens now in the future? And these funds were really badly managed. They didn't get in this situation entirely by circumstances.
No,
they made bad choices, bad decisions, and now there's going to be an investment advisory board in place. We don't know the details of that, but we do know they're going to have final say on every investment this board makes. Because if you simply wipe away the debt and then let them go back to the same old practices, you're going to be here again in
Well,
5 years.
and you know, it's not just that they made bad investments, which they did. I mean,
did.
you look around the city of Detroit at the real estate investments they've made; they've not gotten a penny back on even the ones that we would say are good projects. The book Cadillac
Right.
owes a lot of money into the pensions, but it was also the practices of managing the pensions. The 13th checks that were handed out for years, the annuities where people put 4% of their pay into an annuity, but were guaranteed an 8% return. Wonderful numbers, but you got to pay for that. You talk about those kinds of things. These COLAs, they call them cost of living adjustments, but they're built-in increases, regardless of inflation or CPI or the investment performance. These are the kind of things that dug this hole, and you have got to get them to stop doing that. And they came in to see both Nolan and I last week separately at editorial board meetings. They aren't even at the point of acknowledging that these were bad ideas.
They're
No,
not.
or that-
How can they not be at that point?
I mean, because they still have this attitude that all of this was promised and
Right.
all of this, they're entitled to all this. But just as an example, they brought in a retiree with them representing the retirees of their system, and she was about 45, and that's one of the, or she appeared that, but that's one of the problems here is you've got people work for the city 20 years, retire in their 40s, and now another 40 years of collecting benefits, particularly health care. I mean, that was particularly burdensome for the city to keep 50 and 55-year-old people on city health benefits for their whole lives.
So what is the solution then? Change what the promise is?
Well, you absolutely have to do that. They've solved the healthcare thing with these VIVAs. I'm not quite sure how those are going to work.
Well, I think it'll be like the auto Vivas. They will give some sort of lump sum to the unions and say, this is your payout. You manage everybody's health care going forward. That's an idea that I remember being floated a couple of years ago. Everyone said, no, we could never do it. Now it resurfaced this week.
Well, you can do it now because you can afford to bond to fund it. Before you couldn't bond to fund it.
Let me ask this. What does this potential agreement show other cities who are in financial turmoil that have the long-term obligations? What do they take from this or see, hey, if our city ends up bankrupt down the line, what can we expect and what can our pensioners expect?
It's been relatively painless, hasn't it?
I think this shows. I think this shows that you don't have to crush the most vulnerable people in this process to make it work. The city has a lot of deep financial problems, and they got to get solved. I don't think you do it on the backs of people who are the worst off.
No, but they do have the luxury of having the grand bargain out there, and I say luxury because we're operating under the assumption that now, since a lot of these pieces are falling into place, that grand bargain will start to work and the legislature will come forward and give up the $350 million.
Yeah.
And
that's a key change, Christy.
That is the key.
This week they went from $350 million over
20 years
to $350 million up front, and that's going to be a tough sell to the legislature. They'll obviously not be able to take it out of the general fund. They'll have to sell bonds. I think it's a more sensible way to do it because it removes it from the annual budget fight, and it protects it in case things go south again with our tax revenues.
But $350 million that you bond for over 30 years is more like $475 million in total cost, and maybe even more of that. So now you're talking about a bigger commitment from the state, and you're also talking about doing that at a time when you can go drive any highway in this state and come across a city that has the exact same problem.
Well, speaking of driving the highways, you're now going to bond out $450 million to bail out Detroit instead of fixing everybody's roads.
The roads.
I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's going to be a tough sell.
Well, and then you're going to have people saying, okay, if we're in trouble now 5 years down the road, where's ours? Where's our grand bargain? Where's our money from the legislature? Where's our money from the federal government? If the Obama administration is talking about kind of shifting around that $100 million, have you set up in making sure that Detroit gets out of this? Have we set up a dangerous precedent going down the line that, gosh, we can't afford to bail everybody out?
Well, you might have, but you also might have really sent a shock through the municipal bond markets, the people who loan communities money, because they're the only one getting shorted here for the most part. And this idea of shared sacrifice goes out the window, and it may make everybody's borrowing costs go higher.
All right, before we wrap up this topic, and the judge is going to be looking at the revised plan today. I guess I want to look at the long term. Does this make Detroit whole? So even if we come out of bankruptcy, if this timeline speeds up, so we're done in October, which I think is still just staggering that we would be able to get through it in that timeline. Does this ensure that wiping out the debt for Detroit, that the city is able to not only just pay its bills, but reinvest back in the city the amount of money that they need to make it a functioning, not only functioning city, but a city that's going to draw people in? Because isn't that really the bottom line that we're talking
Won't
about here?
do all that.
I don't think it
It'll
can
do
do all that.
some of that.
Yeah.
It frees up about $150 million a year
I think that's
to
right.
put into services, to put in making the city better. We now suddenly have the attention of Washington, so we're getting federal dollars that we hadn't been getting for decades here. And so that's going to help. I think overall things will get better, at least for the short term, unless they start laying on a lot more debt again. But long term, the only way to bring Detroit back is to grow the city. You have to have more people and a stronger tax base.
Does this put us in place to do it, Stephen, or at least have a better shot at it than we've had before?
I think it gives us a shot at providing basic services at a decent level, right? We'll have enough money to get the lights on. I think police response and presence will be noticeably improved. Fire response, garbage pickup, which recently got bid out to a private contractor, I think will be better. It doesn't do much more than that. Now that's a lot in a city that didn't have any of those things reliably before. But there's so much more, right? I mean, people, families especially, expect lots more out of the places that they live, and we don't have it. We haven't even talked about in months or years here the condition of the schools in
Nobody wants to
Detroit.
talk about
That
that.
seems to be,
nobody knows
people
what
have
to
put that
do.
aside because they're concentrating mostly on turning the lights on and making
That's
sure
right.
the cops show up.
That's right. But ask anyone with kids, what's the first or second thing that you think about when you think about where you're going to live? It's the condition of the local schools. We haven't even begun to really fix that in Detroit. So there's an awful lot of work that's still ahead that doesn't have anything to do with the bankruptcy.
And what bankruptcy fixes is the finances. It wipes away the debt. Doesn't wipe away a culture of mismanagement
Yeah,
in
no,
the
that's
city.
right.
It doesn't wipe away a culture of entitlement. You still have those lingering problems. The people themselves have to fix that, and the political leaders they elect have to fix that. You've got to make the city work for the people instead of for the employees and other special interests.
Have we taken a step forward in the positive direction to make sure that that happens with the leaders that we have?
We'll see when
I
they
think so.
get
We're
charged
still
again.
waiting. I think we're still in the let's wait and see with the new mayor and the new council. I think there's some encouraging signs in terms of the decision making that's going on, the prioritization that I think he's brought to City Hall in terms of what's important, what do we got to focus on. But it'll be a couple months, I think, before we can say this is making a difference or it's not.
All right.